Welcome to Spotlights, a biographical program that features people who have made a significant achievement in their chosen fields. My name is Hainga Okwemba, and my guest is constitutional lawyer and advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Julie Soweto. You remember Julie Soweto for her sterling performance at the Supreme Court during the presidential petition of 2017. Julie, welcome to Spotlight.
Thank you, Hainga. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. Julie, is this the first time that you're visiting Broadcasting House?
Yes, this is the very first time I am visiting Broadcasting House. I have never been here before.
You know, that one sounds very strange because this is a lawyer who has actually been in the public limelight. One would have expected that with that kind of life and that prominence in society, you should have visited Broadcasting House.
I think the ball lies in the court of KBC, because I cannot bring myself to Broadcasting House. In fact, you people have certain gentlemen out there with red berets who, if I tried to force myself in there, would not let me in. So I can only come at the invitation of KBC. Today I have come at your invitation. Thank you.
Now, I want us to spend a few minutes to get to understand Julie Soweto. When and where was she born, her delights or liking of the legal profession, if there was anything that really inspired you to want to become a lawyer, and what that was, and where did she go to school before wanting to become a lawyer, or she was forced to become a lawyer?
I am a Kenyan, born, raised in Kenya, in Nairobi. You have asked about my school. Which school do you want to know? I'm a proud alumni of the Kenya High School. I've gone to the University of Nairobi. I think it's also important to note that we don't just call it Kenya High School, we call it the Kenya High School. University of Nairobi is where I did my law degree. I have a master's degree from the University of Pretoria, in which I did human rights and democratization in Africa.
Mm-hmm. So the interest in law, where did that come from, or the passion?
I cannot quite say where that came from. By the time I was leaving high school, my first choice for professional course was actually to be a surgeon. Law was my second choice, but the way things have actually worked out, law is the best choice that God could have made for me. I don't think I would have been happy as a doctor. I am doing exactly what I believe God created me to do, which is law. I have always had a good passion for debate, the defense of people's rights, the defense for the rule of law. I was talking to some of my previous teachers in high school the other day, and I remembered incidents that happened in school that made me realize that I was actually born to be a lawyer. And in fact, everything seemed to have been pointing that way. I am the one who had not seen that the legal profession was stirring the passion that I had.
As a little girl in school?
As a little girl in school.
Great. Now, let's talk about your name, Julie Soweto. Is there any meaning that is attached to that name? Because we Africans sometimes attach certain meanings to our names. Would you attach Julie Soweto or Soweto to any meaning?
Soweto actually refers to the township in South Africa. For those who remember their history, there was an incident that happened there a few years back. I was born around that incident. And so my parents, being who they are, thought they would commemorate the children that died during that incident through the one they had born.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And when you went to the University of Pretoria, did you visit Soweto?
Yes, I did. I visited Soweto Township. I visited Nelson Mandela's house. I saw Vilakazi Street. I was there. I took time to actually go and see this place that I had been named after.
Great. If you are just tuning in, this is KBC English Service Spotlight. And my name is Hainga Okwemba. And my guest, constitutional lawyer or human rights lawyer, Julie Soweto. Julie Soweto comes to our studio when the country is still reeling from that thunderbolt, they have called it, a judgment that was made by a 5-bench judge stopping the process of the BBI. So Akili, I read your article in one of the local dailies soon after the High Court judgment that has rattled BBI proponents. You called your article, "This time the judiciary must hold the line and not cave in to the executive bullying." If I read you right, you are celebrating the boldness of the judiciary and calling on it to remain steadfast. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly what I had intended to do. This must also be put in perspective from where we came from and what has led to where we are today. We go back to 2017, 1st of September, when the Supreme Court made a very bold judgment, laying down what the law is and faulting an election process that had been conducted not in accordance with the law. What followed after that decision was what we can only refer to as executive thuggishness, to suppress an organ of state, which is the judiciary, because they were not happy with the decision that the judiciary had made. And we still suffer the ramifications of what I have called executive bullying to this day. A judge was shot at. The judiciary has been denied funds. We have judges who have not been appointed, all in an effort to emasculate the judiciary because of doing its job. And to an extent, the judiciary caved in. They thought they could pacify the executive or placate the executive to calm down and reason. That has not happened. Mm-hmm. And so it was important to just remind the judiciary that you cannot reason with a serially rogue executive. And giving in is not the way to affirm or, stamp your authority, your constitutional authority. The way you do it is by sticking firm to your decision, holding the line, emphasizing it, reinforcing it, not giving in, not negotiating. Many times we hear people telling the judges, even on this issue of the 41 judges, now 40 judges, that they should negotiate with the executive. This is a process that was conducted through a laid down legal procedure. Once you've done your job, you do not negotiate. You uphold the standard. You remind the other person, this is what the law says. By saying you will negotiate, you are dropping down your guard. You are inviting the other person to continually disregard the rules of engagement that have been set out.
Mm-hmm. Now, just before we proceed, so is there a lacuna in our constitution or in our legal framework that would actually allow the executive not to appoint the 40 judges now, as it were, having gone through that process? Because there could be something that the executive could actually be holding on to for it not to go ahead with the process.
There is no lacuna. The law already provided the process and the space for which anybody who had something to say during the interview process could do. The executive has not done that. They waited until the process went to the end. And even now, we have not been told what it is that they have against, we're told it's some judges, against these judges. These judges continue to serve as High Court judges or as they're working. If there was an issue, there are processes that have been established under the law which you should follow to deal with it. Mm-hmm. If we have a judge, for instance, whom you are alleging is corrupt or not fit to be in office, there is a process for dealing with that. But that is not being done. It's not being followed. Mm-hmm. So this has got nothing to do with the law. This is just simply disregard for the law, and which is why 2 years pass and we don't take any action about it.
Now, the ruling by the 5 judges of the High Court on BBI last Thursday, that was on 13th of May 2021, effectively put a halt to the Constitution of Kenya, Amendment Bill 2020. Is that true, that judgment effectively put a stop to the BBI process?
Hainge, the way to answer that question, and for me, one must ask, is this the first attempt that we have had to change the Constitution? It is not. We must ask then, what is so special about BBI that it seems to be a do or die situation? We have had at least 2 or 3 other initiatives that I know of to change the Constitution. There was the Okoa initiative, which did not succeed because they didn't even get the signatures that were required to bring a constitutional amendment. Then there was the Punguza Mizigo initiative, which made it all the way to the county stage, but they didn't get enough signatures from the counties to change the Constitution.
Yes.
So that process flopped or stalled right there. We have had one successful change of the Constitution. In fact, when I was thinking about it, I realized we changed the Constitution to allow the president the power to appoint the Inspector General of Police. BBI, just as Okoa or Punguza Mzigo, was challenged and brought to a halt because it hasn't complied with certain structures or processes that the Constitution has provided and set out. So it is not strange. It is not the first time that an initiative to change the Constitution has failed or has stopped. It's not the end of the world. People can go back to the drawing board and correct. Go and find out what is it that we have done wrong and start and do it again. Yeah.
So I think, and that would actually bring me to my second question, that you say that the process would actually be stopped because, as it were, BBI has not complied with the laid down procedures that we have in our existing laws. So what are these procedures, or if I should put it differently, what makes it unconstitutional?
It's very simple. The court says you must do things right. There is a procedure to be followed by everyone, no matter who you are, no matter your position. We have a constitution that has laid down the rules of engagement, our terms of engagement. We as citizens, we with government, with our institutions, and the court was simply saying that everybody must follow the process or the law regardless of who they are. So, in a nutshell, the process was not followed.
What is the laid down process in changing the Constitution today?
You must start again with what the Constitution has provided. Who is it who is initiating the process? How are you engaging the process? Is there public participation? Do you need to collect signatures? There's a whole raft of measures or procedures. In fact, when we consider the decision, by the time the court was coming to a final verdict, they had identified some issues that it said all these were not met. There were content issues, but there were also procedural issues. My view is that the procedural issues also inform the kind of content that is arrived at. We as lawyers like saying procedure is the handmaiden of substance. And the court looked at both. There's certain content of the Constitution that if you want to interfere with, there's a process you must follow. And it said this process was not followed.
So is there a way out to salvage the BBI process, given that, if I understand it well, you are the lawyer here, you'll tell us, that time is not on the side of the BBI proponents, that the Constitution as it is today, if you are to amend it, you need not less than 12 months. So if the process were to begin afresh and those processes that you are talking about followed, do we have enough time to amend the Constitution before the 2022 general election?
Once you've made a mistake, there's no undoing it. There's no going back. If the milk is spilled, it's spilled. What is that we say in Kiswahili?
Maziwa yakimwagika hayazoleki.
Yes. So what is there to be undone or to be corrected other than to go back to the drawing board and just do it correctly and properly. Again, I keep wondering, why is it that this process is pegged to the election? If it is being done bona fides, in good faith, then there should be no reason or no stop to doing this process. You put a halt, you take a step back and say, let's start and do this properly. Now, those do not need to be tied to an election. You can do them at any time. So why should there be a rush in doing this within a certain period and tying it down to a specific election? That's then what starts making the question about the bona fides of this process questionable.
And we have a history, of course, going back to the constitution that is in force today. You remember it was actually started during the late President Moi's tenure.
And look at how long it took us.
It was actually halted. He left office before. Because there was that need for the change of the constitution. It was taken over by the Kibaki administration.
Precisely.
So you are right that if it is genuine, we are all Kenyans. Anybody else would then come and initiate the process.
And finish it. We should not be in a rush. You have just mentioned the last process. We had 2 referenda before we finally agreed on the constitution. The first one that we did flopped. We refused and rejected that constitutional draft. Then the second one came after we had gone and revisited and looked at the problems with the one we rejected. Then we finally got a document that was agreeable to most of us, to everyone.
So what does it mean when judges make declarations in a case as they did in this matter? Does that add a certain weight to the pronouncements that they make in court?
It's all the same. The judge just made a pronouncement. It simply means that somebody asked them to declare that this is the law. And so the judge declared that this is the law. This is the provision. If, for instance, you come and say that my rights have been violated, I was arrested the other day in a manner that was not procedural, I will ask the court and say, please make a declaration that the way the policeman behaved was in violation of my right. And the judge will say, I declare that the conduct of the policeman was in violation of your right. It's an affirmation of a position. It doesn't make it any more weighty than if the judge says, I order that the policeman violated your right. In fact, that's just not grammatically correct. It depends on what was the question before the court. And the questions before the court demanded declarations from the court because the court was declaring or affirming what the law is and therefore agreeing with the petitioner or the petitioners.
The case before the High Court arose from 8 different petitions against the BBI process that were consolidated into 15 questions. So was the process flawed right from the start with the setting up of the BBI steering committee, or where did they get it wrong? Was it dead as it was being initiated, dead on arrival?
When you look at the High Court ruling, there are so many things that were wrong with the BBI process that one can't even say this was the right one, this was the wrong one. It's a string of errors. And with a string of errors, I'm remembering one of my literature books, a comedy of errors. You just keep stumbling and falling over one other thing that when you even start looking to see where did we go wrong, you can't quite point and say, this is where we went wrong. This is the one that led to our downfall. This is the one that we need to correct.
So the whole process was flawed.
And also once you start on the wrong footing, if you want to go to Kakamega and you find yourself on Mombasa Road and you keep going, Mombasa Road will never lead you to Kakamega. You will only get to Mombasa. So the whole route is bollocksed, is spoiled from the moment you started. The moment you set foot on Mombasa Road in the name of going to Kakamega, the only place that you will realize that I was on the wrong path is when you get to Mombasa. Or unless you get to Imali, hopefully you ask and say, Kakamega iko wapi? And someone will tell you, dude, you're on the wrong road. You need to go back to where you started from to find your way.
The BBI steering committee was established under a special Gazette notice or Gazette issue of January 10th, 2020. The judges ruled that the BBI steering committee was an unconstitutional entity. I would want you to help our listeners understand why the judges hold that view.
Sometimes the law is not as hard as we try to make it, or even as we lawyers might seek to make it. The BBI steering committee was designed to achieve a goal within the constitutional framework. The Constitution itself has set out mechanisms and parameters within itself. When you say something is unconstitutional, it means it cannot be found in the Constitution or supported by the Constitution. So when you're looking at this thing, you have to go back and ask, where in the Constitution is this provided for? Where in the Constitution is this law created, or this creature that we are talking about? Where in the Constitution is it found? You must go back to the tree, the roots, and look and see this fruit, this pineapple, did it come from this banana tree? It cannot be. Which is why when the court says it's unconstitutional, it means we cannot trace its roots back to the Constitution. We cannot trace its origin to the Constitution, which is where it would draw its life from.
And as a lawyer yourself, do you agree with the judges? Is it true that there's nothing in the Constitution that could actually support the creation of the BBI steering committee?
The judges have looked at and evaluated the evidence that was placed before them and the laws that were placed before them. And once they have made a pronouncement that this is not in the Constitution, ours is to respect their finding. We have an adversarial system of court where judges don't go out and make investigations. One party brought their case forward, the other parties brought their case forward and answered the questions. And the judges, theirs is to look through and sift through the law and then determine where this thing is found. Now, the respondents who were aggrieved by the decision and the finding of the court have a chance, as is their right, to go to the Court of Appeal and tell the court that we don't agree with the finding of the judges. We don't agree with what they said, that this is an unconstitutional entity. So they have an opportunity to go and convince 7 other judges that this entity is actually provided for in our Constitution, and here it is. It is supported by the law, and here it is. And 7 other judges will rule on it and decide whether they agree with the respondents, who will now become the appellants, or whether they agree with the 5 High Court judges on their finding.
If you are just tuning in, this is Spotlights on KBC English Service, and I'm your host, Khainga Okwemba. My guest is constitutional lawyer and advocate of the High Court, Julie Soweto. We are delving into the judgment on BBI by a 5-judge bench of the High Court. Now, the judges contend that a people-driven initiative to amend the Constitution cannot be initiated by the president, who, in other words, is the governor, is the person who is governing the people, and a people-driven initiative must come from the people. There's that argument that if then that is the case, the process of amending the Constitution cannot be initiated by the president. That would make the BBI unconstitutional because the president is not the people. There are those ones who argue that our sovereignty is actually delegated, and therefore the president is a leader. So maybe he can as well initiate the process. Do the proponents of BBI hold any ground, or it is true that this process, as it were, initiated by the president was unconstitutional? It cannot be termed as a people-driven initiative.
But that is a very, I'm looking for polite words to use to say that we ignore this document that I am holding that we call the Constitution of Kenya. And again, to use the words that we lawyers like to use, The law is very clear. The Constitution is very clear. And let me just refer you to the very beginning of our Constitution. Leaving aside the preamble, Chapter 1 puts there in capital letters, caps, sovereignty of the people and supremacy of this Constitution. Sovereignty of the people. Article 1, Subarticle 1 of the Constitution, first and foremost, says all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be exercised only in accordance with this Constitution. Subarticle 2, the people may exercise their sovereign power either, the first one is directly or through their elected representatives.
Elected representatives.
So why are you ignoring the fact that it says the people may do either of the two? They may exercise their power directly or through their elected representatives. You must engage both.
It's not either or.
There's no either or. And even if you choose to have the one over the other, again, decide and tell us, which one are you engaging? Have you decided that this power, we are exercising it through the people or through our representatives? Again, remember, it is the Kenyans who decide how to exercise their power, their sovereign power.
Mm-hmm. So yes.
At the end of the day, really, again, it is to go back and look and see. Because the court is not telling anyone what to do. It's just saying, this one, how you did it, didn't comply with the law.
Julie, I would actually want to hold you a little bit on that. So, their elected representatives, if you are to interpret that phrase, does that mean the member of parliament, an MP, or even the president would fall under that category, or the president is above? The elected representative would actually mean a member of parliament who comes, either is nominated or elected at a constituency level and then goes to the National Assembly or to the Senate.
All of them are elected. All of them are representative. Even the petitioners who went to court are exercising a power donated to them under the Constitution. There are Wanjikos here on one side, Wanjiko and Anyango, who we are saying we are representing. And you're claiming that you're exercising powers for this constituent as their representative. The petitioners who've gone to court to challenge this process are also exercising a power given to them under the Constitution directly. They've invoked their power to also say, in my capacity as a Kenyan, this Constitution allows me to go to court and claim that my right is being violated, or something that is being done in the name of the Constitution is not in keeping with the law. They are exercising a right donated to them under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Because one of the arguments, Julie, there is that the president was actually usurping that provision of a people-driven initiative, that a process initiated by the president, the head of state, cannot then claim to be a people-driven initiative. Is that right?
In his capacity as the head of state, he is enjoying power that has been delegated to him by the people of Kenya to do certain functions and duties. I think rather than react to the judgment of the court, it might be better or more advisable to go back and reason with it or find out what the reasoning is. A lot of the reaction we are now getting is emotional rather than reasoned, which is why, again, we keep going back and we keep saying the court is not telling anybody how to do anything, whether or not you can't change the Constitution or how to conduct your office. Just saying this, our document that allows us, the social contract we have with one another has already provided the way you should do things.
So go there.
So go there. Go there. We have a contract. It's the only thing that stops us from becoming a man-eat-man society. Go back to this document, the one that people shed blood for. The one that after we had stayed with another one from 63, I wasn't even born, until 2010. This one that we then went and signed with each other. Go there and follow what it says. And do what it says.
One of the most profound declarations by the judges is that civil proceedings can be initiated against a sitting president with respect to anything contrary to the Constitution. What is the import of the judgment or the declaration against the long-held view that the president enjoys immunity from prosecution?
I want to ask you a question, Hainga.
Mm-hmm.
If the president came to your house today and took your spoon or took your car, let's call it, he stole it, would he be immune from the law? No, he's not protected from the law because that which he has done, it is not the presidency that has done that act. It is the person that has committed a crime. We can think of a worse example. If the president were to rape someone, they won't come and tell us that the president of the Republic of Kenya raped so-and-so. It's not the office. We'd be told it is Uhuru Kenyatta, so-and-so, who committed this crime. So to understand this question, your listeners need to think about what is it that is protected under the law. The immunity that the law provides is for acts that are done in an official capacity as the president. It's for the office. It's not for the person. Another example, if you even go back to former late president Daniel Arap Moi, left office. A few people came out and sued him. There's a guy who came and said, he took my land. He waited 20-something years until Moi was not president to sue him. And the judges agreed with him at that particular point because Moi was not president. But you see, when Moi took this guy's land, it was not the presidency that took the land from him. And so if the judges had read the law correctly before, or used to read the law correctly before, this guy should have been able to sue the president earlier. He didn't have to wait for 23 years to sue the president. This judgment that we have right now, today, is providing clarity on this question. The president is not above the law. There are acts which, if he does, and they are not done for the office, he can be sued and should be sued. Otherwise, we will have presidents stealing and doing things that I, shouldn't mention, and getting away with it in the name of the president is immune. The president is not immune. And again, our social contract, the Constitution, says the president is not above the law.
Some people have taken issue with the tone of the ruling by the judges with respect to the president referring to him as Mr. Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta rather than by the title of his office. Do they have a case, those ones who are unhappy with the tone?
I don't see anything untoward with referring to the president as Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta. But you also have to put it in context, because this question links to another issue, which is this. The judges said that the president was in breach of the Constitution of Kenya. Our Constitution provides that there are certain things when the president is in violation of the Constitution or in breach of the Constitution, he should be impeached by Parliament. It would be a misnomer to say President Uhuru Kenyatta violated Article this and that of the Constitution Because the very next thing we should be expecting is a move by Parliament to impeach the president and remove him from office for being in violation of the Constitution.
So in theory, the judges have even protected the president by using his name.
Exactly. They have removed him from this space. And there's a reason why, for instance, we refer to the president as His Excellency. It's because we expect excellence from him, from that leader. It's not just a word of art. It carries purport. So when you do things that are beyond excellent, you are actually undermining even that title and office. So I think it's a good thing that you have picked up that it's actually for his own protection and for his own good.
We have also heard some people say that the composition of this 5-judge bench had judges that the president has refused to appoint to the Court of Appeal, that these judges took the opportunity to hit back at the president, those ones who had actually been denied to get to the Court of Appeal.
Khainga, that is a self-inflicted wound. The president should have recused these judges by appointing them a long time ago. Had he appointed them, they would not be here. So they are still in the High Court doing their job. These were the judges who were available. He wanted these judges to remain in the High Court. So they remained in their High Court and they continue to do their job. He made his bed, let him lie in it.
Let's look at the declaration by the judges on the IBC, the Independence, Electoral and Boundaries Commission. One, that the electoral body, as presently constituted, lacks a quorum and cannot then conduct a referendum. And number two, the verification of the signatures in support of the amendment bill was not procedural. Is that what the laws that we have today say?
Which IBC are we talking about? The same IBC that on 1st September 2017, the court said fumbled and bumbled through an election and couldn't deliver a credible election. That's the same IBC. It hasn't changed. This IBC that was indicted by the court for carrying out a sham election, wasting our money, that has not changed to this day. We want to entrust it with such a serious process of changing our constitution? I mean, they seem to proceed, I don't know whether it's with voodoo, witchcraft. It's a bundle of blunders from the very beginning. And the fact that, again, they get it wrong. It's been 3 years since 2017 when they were called out, didn't change. Now again, every day. I mean, in 2017, with their full composition of commissioners, they blundered. Now they are just a fraction. Again, still blundering. I wouldn't trust this IBC with any job.
The judges also declared that the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020 cannot be subjected to a referendum before voter registration. And as you said earlier in the program, that the process is being rushed.
Because voter registration is the one that also gives franchise to the voters. So if you're not registering voters, then it means you're locking out the people who should be making the decision. It has to start with voter registration. It has to start with the people being enabled to exercise their political right under Article 38 of the Constitution. So if there is a group of people that will not be able to exercise those rights, we are locking them out.
As we come to the close, Julie, you write in your article, the one that I quoted at the beginning of this conversation, that eminent legal scholars who rightly lauded the September 1st, 2017 decision by the Supreme Court. That was the presidential petition first brought by Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka against the election of President Uhuru Kenyatta, which election was nullified by the Supreme Court. You say that these eminent legal scholars who rightly lauded that decision, it is easy to see and understand their conflict and struggle in faulting the High Court bench and the BBI judgment. And then you go ahead to say they will struggle to fall on their swords as they must. You are so brutal on your colleagues in the legal profession, those ones who hold a different opinion, in regard to this judgment on the BBI process. Those ones who do not believe the position they are taking, which position is that the judges were right, that this process was unconstitutional. Those ones who think otherwise, you have these very harsh words to describe them.
I'll start with a proverb. There is a proverb that says, blows and wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. If I speak the truth or correct you, it is actually because I care and I am trying to help. Otherwise, if I didn't care, I would sycophantly cheer you on while laughing at your back. So my legal colleagues have nothing to worry about, because I understand the difficulty of this brief. And it's not the lawyers who lose. It's clients who lose cases. Lawyers simply do their job. They come to court, they present their best effort in a case, and sometimes they are extremely difficult. And then they leave the outcome to the judges, So it is not the lawyers that I am fighting with. And in fact, I'm not fighting with them. We need to leave room for lawyers to be able to breathe and advise their clients correctly. If we all get caught up in emotion, then it undermines the people's belief in the systems that we have created. It's our clients who will get emotional, but the professional must stay professional so that he's able to go back and tell his client, this is not a good idea. This may not work. Stop this. Again, the free advice that I was offering my colleagues was born out of what happened in 2017. The emotions were so high after the 1st September 2017 decision, and with the client's emotion running so high and doing things that are otherwise illegal, there is no room to advise the client if we get caught up also in the client's emotions. So we must be able to be professional and just go back and say, for instance, there was no guarantee. We did our best job. We presented the case, and this is the outcome. And the system allows for any outcome. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But you maintain a neutrality. You must just keep back and say, but this is the process and this is what the law has said. So it's just about, taking responsibility and still advising our clients even when they do not like
the advice
and the decision.
Julie Soweto there, an advocate of the High Court and a constitutional lawyer. Julie, thank you so much for finding some time and coming to Broadcasting House.
Thank you for inviting me and having me at Broadcasting House, and to come and talk about this really interesting topic or discussion that we have just had.
Something that is very close to your heart, constitutionalism.
Constitutionalism is very close to my heart. But also the other thing that is closer to my heart is judicial independence. And that is why we preempt this question. We must protect the independence of our judiciary. Without an independent judiciary, we are going to have anarchy. Without an independent judiciary, we are going to go back to the pre-2010 constitutional era, where judges could be bullied, where judges were told to jump and they'd ask, how high? We have come a long way to get this constitution. And so for me, it is important to insulate our judges and to fight for their independence. I think the problem with what happened in 2017 is when we saw the bullying going on, we kept quiet. We left the judges to fight it on their own, and yet judges do not have any weapons to fight. It is the people who must speak up in defense of the judges. It is Wanjiku who eventually suffers. It is Wanjiku who is not able to get justice in court. When a judge is unable to exercise their authority and their mandate freely, without fear or favor, the person who suffers is the litigant. I wish Kenyans understood that connection between their powers, their rights, and the ability of a judge to be free to determine an issue. brought before them. It doesn't affect the politicians only. It affects Wanjiku.
I was your host, Khainga Okwemba. It's goodbye for now.